Well, the sister on the first morning actually spoke about being the mother of a child that had autism. And what I wanted to add to that actually is that in the US, there's a statistic that 1 out of 88 children is autistic.
Oh my God.
Yes. And
oh, that's pathetic.
the only correlation that they make between that statistic and what's changed is the vaccinations. And I know there's been a huge struggle in the UK against vaccinations. And there's also been mothers in the US that have been very much involved in that organizing. But it's really clear that the vaccinations cause a kind of brain inflammation in children, and that the autism has been directly connected to this problem. So that was one. I should say, I work in San Francisco, and I'm also a nurse and a homeopath. And I wanted to also make a point, say something about Occupy in San Francisco, because the one thing that happened there is a woman was stabbed in the downtown, and she decided to go to Occupy for her health care instead of going to the general hospital. And that was because the nurses had set up a tent at Occupy, right? And they provided caring health care as opposed to what you get at the public hospitals in the US. So I wanted to make both those points. And I wanted to also say I really appreciated the discussion on the health care that happened on day one. Because so much of that, the information about what price people pay for health care never comes out. So I was really appreciative to hear that as well.
Other hands? Yes, Kiki.
Was Anna going to speak first now?
What?
Okay. I just wanted to say add to the Occupy, the report about, how we worked with Occupy. I felt like the whole experience of going to Occupy, and many of us volunteered in the info tent, where people would come in, all kinds of people, school kids, in their uniform, older women would come in and give their £5 and say, you have no idea how much we support you. And someone said that you just felt like you'd become mainstream. You've been doing all this activism for quite a long time, and, all of a sudden it was very obvious that everyone was really, really angry with the bankers, that everyone, felt, that loads of people felt like you felt, and that you'd become mainstream. And, people would come, like Nell was describing when they were occupying that house. People would come and offload mattresses, loads of material for the Occupy so that they could function. And I work with Women Against Rape, and Women Against Rape and Black Women's Rape Action Project were invited to facilitate a couple of workshops on safer spaces and on sexism, and specifically because there had been a rape at the Occupy camp in Glasgow, where women and men had tried to get together to deal with it and help the woman who had been raped, but they were being attacked by other women and men, who didn't want them to help the woman. She was a homeless woman, which was also another thing that happened in Occupy. A lot of the people who were really dedicated to the camp was homeless people, and that was never recognized, by the people who spoke to the media or by the material that was put out, because, there was a lot of, prejudice or discrimination against homeless people. And in fact, especially in the winter when it was snowing and everything, it was the homeless people that was keeping the camp going and, holding it down. So when the rape happened in Glasgow, one thing that happened was some feminists decided that they were part of the 1% and that they were going to call for all the occupiers to be closed down, or at least the one in Glasgow, because they hadn't been able to protect the woman who was attacked, and to just call for the whole, camp to close down, then you've definitely decided that, you're not part of that movement. And we went to a few of the national gatherings. There was one in London, one in Edinburgh, one in Sheffield, and one in Southend a couple of weekends ago, where people from different occupies all over the country took part. And one thing that was quite striking was people outside of London had, but part of what you could see is, in fact, outside of London, people were more compassionate and more, interested in hearing the experience of the homeless people, the people who were, young activists who were not homeless, were more kind of appreciative of the homeless people's experiences of already having lived outside, knowing a lot about what it's like to live outside, and organising around that. And also that they had a lot of good experiences of dealing with problems within the camp, which London hadn't necessarily dealt with very well, the different problems that came up. Anyway, I felt like, it was really a learning experience. I really learned a lot by being part of it. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Margaret had her hand up, and then Chrissy. And then Ruth. Margaret, Chrissy, Ruth. Anna. Nafisa.
Right, just a few
Everything quick.
quickly. I'm sure people may be aware that in the U.S. on May 1st, the Occupy movement has called for a national strike. And it's not separate, but it's not the unions that have called the national strike. It's the Occupy movement that has called for a general strike, and they have asked the unions to support. Some of the unions in New York City who have been working closely with Occupy, like the Transport Workers Union that refused to, sued the city actually, when they were forced to carry on the buses the protesters who were arrested. Some of them have been supportive of the strike, but it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen on May 1st. It's going to be in 100 cities in the United States, and a lot of it is community-based for this general strike. And I just saw some posters on the door for a general strike here as well. People should, just quickly to mention that the young man who spoke before, Malcolm, on activism of the students, and the young man who spoke about being inside in prisons, that what people who are calling themselves former prisoners or FIPs in the United States have been very well organized. They've had a series of conferences now that they're calling the new civil rights movement. Some of those people were involved in the Georgia strike, and also in California there was a hunger strike within the prison, starting with those in solitary confinement, and within a matter of days there were thousands of prisoners in about 31 prison sites throughout the states that participated. Just thought to quickly share that piece of information. Also, you see now among some of the young black youth, some activism around the murder of Troy Davis, as well as the murder of Trayvon Martin. And we're seeing how all of that is going to play out. There really isn't time to go into it now, but people should know that there really is an undercurrent of activism happening. The attack on immigrant communities in the United States in places like Arizona and Georgia. There's a case before the Supreme Court. I think somebody mentioned it yesterday. But basically, it would bring in states' rights to have control over immigrant communities, and for policemen, local policemen in states, to have the right to arrest and deport people. And the Supreme Court in the United States is now ruling on that, and it looks as though they're moving in the direction of ruling in relation to the right wing and the anti-immigrant community. But there's been a coming together on a grassroots level of immigrant communities and African American communities where traditionally we've been divided one against the other. So this is just an example of some of the ways that the movements are starting to come together in the United States. We'll see what happens on May 1st. There was some talk yesterday about what we might be doing here on May 1st. We're doing it on May 1st. So what we're doing here is very much part and parcel of that wider movement.
Say what it is, Margaret.
On May 1st, we want to take on the Red Cross, the NGOs who, and the Red Cross really representing one of the larger NGOs for their ripoff of Haiti. And of course we know that it wasn't only Haiti. Haiti is the present example, but in New Orleans after Katrina and in many other places around the world where basically they're stealing the money of the people, and we really have got to call out the NGOs. They were also behind undermining the Occupy camps in a number of places as well and shutting down the Occupy camps. So that's going to be May 1st here in London. We're all hoping that everybody here will be able to join us and will be able to participate in it. If you haven't signed up on the mailing list at the back, please be sure to do it so you can get information about the venue and the time for that particular action. Is that right?
It's EC, yes, it's EC, London EC, and we have to decide on a time, but we will by the end of this session. Who's next? Nafisa from Occupy,
Hi,
the
hello.
London Stock Exchange.
Okay, I'll just try to say a few words really quickly. Occupy is where I met Selma and all the great women at Global Women's Strike. I found myself live streaming and running around with a laptop like a headless chicken. But when I met Selma and I was live streaming, I realised I was there for the right reasons. The 2 years before, I was working in Bangladesh and Dubai, where in Bangladesh, a lot of things bothered me, seeing sort of 12-year-old girls working as sort of servants, the garment factories. Went to Dubai for 2 years, where I found myself working and seeing the construction workers living in labour camps. And you'd see news stories where 8,000 women have gone missing from Bangladesh, and they're in Dubai working as maids and being abused by the Arab men. And it was, I felt like I saw the future in Dubai. It was capitalism at its worst, where there was no trade unions, where people were living in this labour camp and they had no say, there was no rights. When I came back to the UK, I just saw David Cameron and Nick Clegg had been voted in, and I knew that things were wrong. And with Occupy, I was working with a live stream, and also we set up the Occupy Criminal Investigations Unit, which we've sort of combined the sort of activist lawyers, and we've been concentrating on different issues. And at the beginning, it was all about the financial. So we worked on the research for RBS, where we took the action of doing a teach-out in Canary Wharf, and we heard, and then straight away the Prime Minister started saying our spiel, and the RBS, they took away the bonus or whatever, that I would argue with some people at Occupy that it was about different issues, and we wanted to concentrate on the sort of family law, because at the Occupy camp there was 3 different people who had their children taken away by the social services because they couldn't afford to keep the children. And I found out about something, an organisation called CAFCAS, where they sort of get paid £8,000 for each child they put up for adoption, and the highest earner got $1.5 million. So we were working, there's a girl, and she set up a group, Anonymous Parents Against the Social Services. And a lot of people are saying that this is not what Occupy is about. But I've come here today and realised that we're going to carry on campaigning this, because Occupy is about all these things and all these issues. So thank you so much for sharing all your stories. And we're just going to take action.
And then Ruth.
Okay. One of the things that I'm not sure that we touched on as women of colour in the Global Women's Strike, was the work that we're doing to expose, again, who's been flip-flopping between the movement and the 1%. So, for example, there's Lee Jasper, who was formerly a race advisor to Ken Livingstone, who did in the 80s and 90s did, campaigning work, solid work on exposing racism. But now we find him popping up and during the riots, speaking about the reason for the riots as being the lack of good parenting, which was really a code for, black single mothers on welfare. So we did, together with others, we did a letter which was calling out what the Operation Hope and Recovery, which is another one of these Quango NGO whatevers that popped up and got money from God knows where, to be able to say that kind of shit and to really target and attack our communities. And then we find them popping up in Occupy, and bringing with them again, trying to use the credibility of Occupy to speak out and to encourage people to come on board with their stuff. And I think that's a role that we've all got to be aware of, whatever sector we're working in, as to where the people who were once supposedly on our side and with us are now gone to the dark side and taking the money.
Thank you. Thank you. Ruth, and then the sister back there.
Okay.
Yes.
One of the questions facing Occupy, certainly in this country and I think everywhere, is what does it actually stand for? We started off at the very beginning, somebody on the camp went to the Guardian with a list of demands which had been rejected by the General Assembly and which were a very limited set of demands about the City of London Corporation. We now have an international manifesto which has been worked out online by various people who work online and claims to speak for Occupy internationally, and is basically what you'd see from any sort of Labour Party list of demands, including stuff about making the World Bank and the reforming the World Bank and the IMF.
Reforming.
We've had people meeting with the Financial Services Authority. We've had people writing to the press when the press labels us anti-capitalist to say, no, no, we are not anti-capitalist, despite the fact that many of us are. We've had against that people really holding on to the 10 points that we worked out at the beginning. And those 10 points, they're not exactly demands, they're almost demands, they're a perspective, and the strike had a lot to do with formulating that. I know because I was very involved in it at the very beginning, the first couple of days when we worked it out. Yasmin, who's the woman who announced the slut walk here, I was writing down what people were saying in a workshop of about 50 people, and she said something about who we were there, and we have in here, we are of all ethnicities, backgrounds, genders, generations, sexualities, disabilities, and faiths. We stand with occupations all over the world. We had to fight for that. People didn't like us saying we are all these things. They said, oh, well, we want to welcome those, as if we were not those. We have, the current system is unsustainable. We refuse to pay for the bank's crisis. We do not accept the cuts as either necessary or inevitable. And we have, the world's resources must go towards caring for people and the planet, not the military, corporate profits, or the rich. And that's a familiar perspective which stands really in opposition to the people who are trying to make us into another form of the Labour Party. And it has been repeated constantly on many, many Occupy occasions, on marches, on evictions outside the court, and taken up around the country as the basis of the list, their own lists of what they stand for in different cities. We added the climate, which to my shame wasn't in at the beginning, but it is there now. We didn't add housing. We haven't. I haven't been able to manage to add housing into that, which definitely belongs. But we do have the record of a speak out by homeless people at Occupy, which is on film, and a shorter film is being made of that, which hopefully can be used. But what we need to do is to steer away from the Labour Party list and go more towards standing for welfare and health and other very concrete things, because Occupy has been good at saying where the money's going to, the bankers and so on, and not so good at saying it's ours and we want it back and we created all of it. Dealing with welfare, when the Global Women's Strike tried to hold a meeting, did hold a meeting at Occupy to deal with the welfare emergency, people objected to it being called an emergency, and objected to the strike coming into Occupy to do that, as if this was some sort of alien presence instead of what, the basis of what Occupy actually stands for. This has everything to do with the sex, race, and class divisions at Occupy. It's not an accident that the statement which was written by homeless people was watered down. Just as at the beginning of Occupy, I was sitting on the steps at St. Paul's, and I heard one young black man turn to another and say, when Selma James came here, she warned us, what you do will be watered down. And that... You know, that was exactly what happened to the homelessness statement. You know, the teeth were taken out of it, and that was what passed. We have people saying that you shouldn't be talking all the time about camping. And in fact, what they don't want is people to talk about caring. They don't want people to talk about the power relations that people are trying to work out on the camps. They don't want people to talk about safer spaces. That's what they mean when they say that we don't want all this talk about camping. The last thing on Occupy I want to say is that people have had an idea that the process that we have there is like a gift to the world, which we should be spreading everywhere. You know, the General Assemblies, the working groups, the wavy hands, and so on. In fact, when people are honest, they admit that it's not actually working terribly well. That it's true that it involves many people, but it's not so accessible to people who are not very used to meetings. It's very easy to manipulate by people who are very used to meetings. It's enabled the building up of an extremely unaccountable clique, which is not rotated and not answerable to anybody in any way. And these are issues that people at Occupy London, I haven't been there much lately, but I know a lot of people at Occupy London are really grappling with those. They are actually class issues. They're also issues of sex and of race. But they're at the foundation of determining, you know, what it's going to mean to the world now.
Can we have a list of the original demands, please, for the wall of the centre?
I have leaflets with them here.
Yeah, but we want a list so that you can see it from across a crowded room. There's a hand in the back there, and then Andres. Please.
My name's Millie, I'm 14 years old, and I was first made aware of the fantastic work that Crossroads Women does by my friend Rasheen, who's actually the daughter of Solveig Francis and Michael, who are very integral people to the Crossroads and Global Women's Strike, but also the Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. And I think it was more than a year ago when I first asked, well, what does your Free Palestine badge actually mean? Because actually I, until then, wasn't aware of the Israeli situation. I wasn't aware of the oppression that is existent. And now, now a year on, I know a lot. And I'm wholly disgusted, not just by the evident criminal and human rights abuses that the Israeli government are undertaking, but because of the enormous secretive support that they receive from Western governments. And what I really think is so fantastic about the Jewish Anti-Zionist Network and other networks similar to it is that actually Israel today and the situation there is almost taboo. It's not something that I had encountered a year ago everywhere I looked around, and it's actually something, using a quote from Robert Kennedy, that says when a person stands up for an ordeal or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from miles around, these tiny ripples of hope build up an enormous wave which can crash down the walls of mighty oppression. And that is what is going to make people aware of the situation in Israel. And that, yes, they're a very powerful government. We are a very powerful force, and as has been mentioned today, we are the 99%, and we can defeat those powers and those governments that are killing and murdering and being so oppressive to millions of people. So, thank you.
Andrew, no, just stay, Andrew. The mic will come to you.
Good evening, comrades. One extremely important thing that can be left out of any campaign is a campaign for the abolition of the death penalty worldwide. The terrible thing about the death penalty is if we do it and then we find out that we have made a mistake, there are no return tickets. And another important reason for abolishing the death penalty is because of what is being done to followers of Falun Gong in China. Followers of Falun Gong are being hideously tortured to death as a death sentence simply for what they believe in. So obviously that is another important reason for our campaign. And lastly, I understand that there is a very strong campaign in Italy to achieve this. So my message is, let us join Italy, get on board and join the campaign. Thank you.
While I take the mic over there, I just want to announce that the state of Connecticut in the United States has abolished the death penalty. One down, I don't know how many to go.
Okay, I'm going to say that Sarah is the last person before
Yeah.
and Ben.
I just
from
wanted, there was
France.
something important. I forgot to say that one of the other ways that the agents are operating is by driving out kind of organized groups. And I wanted to mention very good people from the climate camp, from what was formerly climate camp, helped set up Occupy and were basically hounded out and accused of all sorts of things. And, you know, we did try to defend them. And we also, you know, the Global Women's Strike got witch hunted, but in fact it was very clarifying because, you know, part of driving home to the end, which Nikki spoke about yesterday, is that, you know, you have to go all the way with calling these people out, you know, and not let them get away with what they're doing. The last point, I was glad that Kiki mentioned about homeless people, because the homeless people were absolutely central to the camp in London. It couldn't have existed because they were the ones who stayed there through the winter and also had a whole set of skills to live outside and find things cheaply. And it was just one of the heartbreaking moments was when the homeless people statement, they wrote a long statement, it was fantastic. And then people who were not homeless said it was too long and had the gall to rewrite it. So that was, you know, an absolute, just disgusting. So I just wanted to raise those two things.
Ben.
I'm Ben from PDMS Network, work with the Global Women's Strike here. I just wanted to give an example of what I think Occupy have achieved in terms of showing to other movements what is possible. There's been a student strike in Quebec, Canada for the last 2.5 months, I think. Woo. And I think the students are still fighting against an increase in tuition fees. So that was and there's been an historic demonstration of 250,000, which is what the equivalent like a person out of 10 went out in the street against that. So I really feel that Occupy have showed that, you know, when you start fighting, you organize in the long run because, you know, it's not going to be won with just one action. So I was very struck by the relation between Occupy and this movement.
Thank you.